before we dive into this story, while you're watching, go ahead and drop a comment telling me what city you're from and what the weather's like over there. I'm honestly really curious where you're listening to these dark stories. Like, is it raining? Is it the middle of the night? Are you curled up in a warm room? Or maybe you're on your way home right now? And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, it really helps the channel grow. So get comfortable, turn off the lights, if you're brave enough. Today we're talking about a case that, completely shook an entire town and made people afraid of those who were supposed to bring them comfort. Rebecca Gay was born on March 26, 1988, to Thomas and Sally Gay. She grew up with her 3 siblings in Midland, Michigan. Her father, Thomas, was deeply respected in the community. People knew him as a true expert in horseback riding, horse care, and training. He was even one of the founders of a charity horse racing event created to raise money for a children's hospital. He was incredibly compassionate toward both people and animals. Thomas set a powerful example for his kids, teaching them unity, faith, and hard work. Rebecca's childhood unfolded in a small town where she felt the safety of a close-knit community, the type where everyone knows everyone. She played outside with her siblings, went to church with her family, and attended the local school. She stood out for her gentle nature and her empathy traits she clearly inherited from her parents. When Rebecca's father fell ill with an incurable disease, the family had to make a heartbreaking decision to move him into a hospice where he could receive round-the-clock care. His wife and children visited as often as they could, trying to make his final days a little easier. Around this time, Rebecca was in high school and part of the school's equestrian team. She also volunteered at archery competitions, helping raise money for families in need. Basically, she was continuing her father's legacy. After graduating in 2007, Rebecca decided to build a career in the beauty industry and enrolled in cosmetology school. During this period, she was in a serious relationship with a young man named Chad Sando. She completed her cosmetology program and started working as a stylist at a salon in Mount Pleasant, not far from where her mother, Sally, lived. After Thomas was moved to hospice and later passed away, Sally fell into a deep loneliness. Her kids had grown up and moved on with their own lives, leaving her alone with her thoughts and fears about the future. Sally had spent so many years with Thomas that facing life without him was incredibly hard. Struggling with being alone, she turned to online dating not to find a new husband, but just to fill that emptiness. She wasn't looking for a romance. She just needed someone to talk to, someone who could, ease that heavy feeling of isolation. She moved to a mobile home in the Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. Eventually, she met a man she started talking to. His name was John Douglas White, and he lived in Augusta, Michigan, roughly a 2-hour drive away. Before long, they moved in together, and John became a pastor at the local church where Sally taught Sunday school. They really enjoyed each other's company. They had a lot in common, especially their Christian faith. Mount Pleasant, Michigan, had a population of a little under 20,000 people. The area where Sally lived was about a 20-minute drive from town, a rural place with scenic farms and quiet countryside. It was peaceful, the kind of place perfect for raising kids. Rebecca, Sally's younger daughter, eventually learned she was pregnant. When her baby boy was born, they named him Connor. She and Chad did everything they could to give him a stable life. Unfortunately, having a baby can be a huge test for a lot of young couples, and in their case, Chad just couldn't handle it. While motherhood completely transformed Rebecca, her little boy, Connor, became her whole world, and she threw herself into giving him the absolute best life she could. And even though Rebecca had always been caring and responsible, becoming a mom gave her life an even deeper meaning. She somehow managed to juggle work and the responsibilities of being a single mother, and despite everything, she never complained. She actually approached life with this quiet gratitude. When she realized she needed extra support, she rented a mobile home in the same area where her mom lived, the Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. It gave her real peace knowing her mom was right nearby. Sally and John lived just across the road. Rebecca and her son visited almost every evening. John cooked dinner for them and helped take care of Connor. He loved the idea of having a real family again. He stepped right into that father figure role for Rebecca and a grandfather role for Connor. He drove the little boy to daycare and watched him whenever Rebecca was busy. For a while, Rebecca built her career in cosmetology, but after Connor was born, she couldn't spend long hours in the salon anymore, so she got a job at a retail store in Mount Pleasant. She trusted her mom and John with childcare. They'd basically all become one family. Rebecca got along great with her coworkers and moved up to a management position pretty quickly. And honestly, her personal life also started falling into place. She met a man named Aaron Quinn when Connor was about 1 year old. Aaron immediately treated the little boy as if he were his own. He loved Rebecca deeply, respected her, and was already planning to propose. Aaron's family considered Rebecca one of them, and Sally and her partner, John White, completely supported her relationship. Rebecca, in turn, accepted John into her own family pretty quickly. There was this one time he got really sick with a bad cold, and she cooked him soup, bought him medicine from the pharmacy, and even ordered pizza for him. John was always there to help her with Connor, so Rebecca felt like she finally had a solid support system and a bright future ahead. Being surrounded by good, kind people meant everything to her. Her life was simple, modest, but she filled it with warmth and love, giving her son everything he needed. By the year 2012, Connor was 3 years old, and Halloween was just around the corner. Rebecca was extra excited. It had always been her absolute favorite holiday since childhood. And now Connor was at that adorable age where costumes and trick-or-treating were, oh my god, like the best thing in the world. They'd already picked out a cute Spider-Man costume for him. The store where she worked had gotten a shipment of scarecrows, and she bought 8 of them to decorate the yard. Rebecca loved holiday decorations, pumpkins everywhere, fake cobwebs, spooky little signs on the door. She went all out. The night before Halloween, she was home alone with Connor. The next morning, she needed to drop him off with Chad, his biological father, because he was supposed to spend the day with him. After her shift, she planned to pick him up, get him into his costume, and take him trick-or-treating for the very first time. She was so excited that she called her mom and Aaron just to share her joy. That evening, she was her usual self, happy, full of energy, completely focused on Halloween. Nobody had any idea that she would never live to see the holiday. The past few months, she'd been working an early shift so she could spend more time with her son. So, when she didn't show up for work on October 31st, 2012, everyone, her managers and coworkers, was confused. Rebecca never called, never sent a message. As a manager herself, she would never sleep in or skip a shift. And the strangest part? Nobody could reach her. Her boss sent one of the coworkers to her house to check on her. Maybe she'd had car trouble or needed help. But when he knocked, nobody answered. It seemed like no one was home. He tried the door, it was locked. So he went back to his car and drove off. But on the way, he noticed something weird. A few dozen yards from Rebecca's house, there was a bar, and in its parking lot he saw a light blue 4-door Buick. It was Rebecca Gay's car, but there was absolutely no reason for her to leave it there. She had parking right next to her home. The coworker walked into the bar and asked about the car. The bartender working the evening shift said he'd seen the car, but Rebecca never came inside. The night before, she'd been home with her son, so it made zero sense that she'd suddenly walk into a bar and leave little Connor alone. But the staff managed to get the phone number for the owner of the trailer park. The owner agreed to unlock Rebecca's door so the coworker could at least check whether she was okay. Rebecca was 24, young, healthy, but oh my god, anything could have happened. Maybe she was home but couldn't get to the door, but she wasn't there. The only thing inside was her favorite purse, sitting open on the table. She never went anywhere without it. Aaron had given it to her as a gift. The coworker contacted Sally and John to see if Rebecca had mentioned any plans for the day. The moment her mother heard that Rebecca hadn't shown up to work, she and John rushed straight to her home. Neighbors began gathering near the trailer, whispering and wondering where a young mother could have gone. Around noon, the family reported her missing to the county sheriff's department, but the authorities hesitated to start a full search right away since Rebecca was an adult. The officers didn't want to jump to conclusions, but they admitted something felt off. They decided to wait until 4:30 in the afternoon, when Rebecca was supposed to pick up Connor, to make sure this wasn't just some misunderstanding. Missing work was one thing, but not calling her family or her boyfriend, that was something totally different. And if a mother doesn't show up to pick up her own child, something is seriously wrong. In the end, 4.5 hours were lost, precious time that could have been used to gather information, preserve evidence, and figure out what had happened to her. Rebecca's family had no choice but to wait. John White started calling her friends and acquaintances. As a pastor, he also reached out to his congregation, asking them to help with the search. Sally prayed desperately for her daughter's safety, hoping she'd walk through the door with some simple explanation. The family tried not to panic, but honestly, that was almost impossible. That morning, Connor was supposed to be dropped off in the grocery store parking lot, where Chad would pick him up. Since Rebecca was working the daytime shift now, she couldn't do it herself, so Sally and John stepped in. That morning, John got to the trailer around 7 o'clock. While Rebecca was in the bathroom getting ready for work, he waited for Connor to wake up, changed him out of his pajamas, and drove him to his father. John hadn't noticed anything unusual that morning, and now he couldn't stop wondering, how could Rebecca just vanish in such a short amount of time? By 4:30, she still hadn't appeared. By then, the police had obtained a warrant to search her home and her car. They saw the open purse, but Rebecca's keys and phone were nowhere to be found. There were no signs of forced entry, meaning either she took the items herself or someone else did. The most troubling thing was a patch of carpet in the hallway. It looked fluffier than the rest, like it had been cleaned just recently. Looking closer, detectives noticed dark streaks. It might have been blood, or maybe Connor had spilled something, and his mom tried to clean it. But then they found tiny droplets of blood on one of the walls. There were also faint splatters on the kitchen cabinets and the doorknob. These discoveries were deeply alarming, so the police wrapped the house in yellow crime scene tape, a grim contrast to the cheerful Halloween decorations still hanging around the yard. Then they moved on to her car and immediately noticed something odd. Rebecca was short, so she always kept the driver's seat pulled up close to the steering wheel. Now it was pushed way back. There was no possible way she could have reached the pedals from there. On top of that, the car's location tucked back near some trees, almost like someone tried to hide it, raised even more questions. At this point, police had no doubt a crime had taken place. They interviewed relatives, friends, and coworkers, trying to figure out who would ever want to hurt Rebecca Gay. No one had an answer. She was kind, quiet, never caused problems for anyone. She didn't get involved in risky situations. She didn't have enemies. While neighborhood kids celebrated Halloween, running around joyfully collecting candy, Rebecca's family was drowning in fear. Connor's very first Halloween would forever be overshadowed by the terror of his mother's disappearance. That day, the little boy never put on his Spider-Man costume. He didn't get to experience any of the traditions. John asked one of the church elders to pray for Rebecca's safe return. It's impossible to imagine what the family felt while people walked around in costumes splattered with fake blood, knowing that inside Rebecca's home, investigators had found real traces of it. Halloween night took on a chilling, horrifying meaning for them, one they would never forget. Costumes stopped feeling fun, because suddenly, oh my God, it felt like a real monster could be hiding behind any mask. The first people to fall under suspicion were Chad Sando, Connor's father, and Rebecca's ex, and her current partner, Aaron Quinn. Whenever something happens to a woman, it's almost always her partners who end up under the brightest spotlight. Both men were brought to the station for questioning. Aaron cooperated right away and seemed genuinely shaken by Rebecca's disappearance. He knew how much she loved this holiday. He said the last time he talked to her was the night before. At 10:43 p.m., he sent her a goodnight text, but she never wrote back. Aaron just assumed she'd already fallen asleep. The next morning, what really startled him was that she didn't respond to his usual good morning either. Even more concerning, the message didn't even deliver. That meant her phone was either turned off or completely out of service. Police removed Aaron from the suspect list once his alibi for that morning was confirmed. In fact, Aaron admitted to detectives that he'd been planning to propose to Rebecca for weeks. He'd been saving money for a ring and waiting for the perfect moment. He hoped that moment would be on Halloween night, her favorite holiday. But, of course, that moment would never come. For a moment, detectives considered the possibility that maybe Rebecca didn't want to be with Aaron anymore and had just taken off. But that theory fell apart instantly. Everyone they spoke to insisted that Rebecca loved Aaron deeply and dreamed of marrying him. They talked about their future together, about building a family. Next up was Chad, and he didn't have anything suspicious to add either. He spoke warmly about his ex, saying that despite everything, they kept a friendly relationship and always tried to do right by their son. Finally, investigators turned to one more important man in Rebecca's life, Pastor John White, her mother's fiancé and a huge part of Connor's upbringing. He was likely the last person to see Rebecca alive that morning when he came to pick up Connor and take him to his dad. While she got ready for work, he handled the little boy's routine. Because of that, John immediately came under close scrutiny. Detectives were laser focused on the precision of his answers, and honestly, that kind of pressure would rattle anyone. It's easy to forget tiny details from your morning routine when you have no idea those details will later matter. What was she wearing? Did she look normal? Did she seem stressed? Did she say she was going straight to work? The questions just kept coming. But detectives still hoped John could help shed some light on something, anything that might lead them to Rebecca. John genuinely tried to cooperate and carefully walked them through the entire morning. At 55 years old, he was used to waking up early to help Rebecca. When he arrived at the trailer, the porch light was on and the door was unlocked, so he figured she was already awake and getting ready for work. When he stepped inside, he heard the shower running, so he didn't actually see Rebecca, only heard her voice. She called out that Connor was still asleep and suggested he lie down for a bit, asking him to turn off the heat before leaving. John lay down on the couch and dozed off. Around 8 o'clock, Connor woke him up. By then, Rebecca had already left for work, so he changed the boy out of his pajamas and drove him to his father. On the surface, everything John said sounded totally reasonable, nothing alarming at all. But detectives noticed one strange detail that immediately caught their attention. John had fresh scratches on his nose and hands, the kind of marks that look like defensive wounds. When they asked about them, he gave what seemed like a logical explanation. He said he'd been doing some repairs in his trailer, and a shelf fell and hit him in the face. He even offered to show detectives exactly where it happened. They accepted his explanation and let him go while they continued investigating. They interviewed neighbors, friends, relatives, anyone connected to Rebecca, trying to understand what her relationship with John White was really like. Slowly, they started piecing together fragments of information, noticing things that didn't fit the bigger picture. That's when they decided to focus more closely on John, at least until another suspect appeared. They interviewed church members, about 24 people. Everyone loved Pastor White. Sally Gay was also a member of the church and taught Sunday school. At one point, she saw an ad for a pastor position and told John about it. He'd gotten his minister's license years earlier. He decided to try for the job. The church elder who hired him told detectives that Pastor John White was a man of God and had absolutely nothing to do with Rebecca's disappearance. He was known as a gentleman, easy to talk to. People respected him for helping, not just Rebecca. He cleaned the gutters on her home whenever needed. He helped a family with 6 kids build a backyard deck and often watched their children. John had been a part of Sally and Rebecca's lives for more than 6 years, earning their complete trust. Investigators explained that they needed to rule out everyone in Rebecca's life standard procedure. But as they spoke with more locals, whispers started spreading that police suspected Pastor John White. And slowly, people's opinions about him began to shift. Employees at the local bar shared a few things too. It turned out that Pastor White actually liked strong drinks, not exactly something the church would approve of. That Halloween morning, he'd stopped by the bar asking about Rebecca, and some of her coworkers said she had mentioned more than once that John made her deeply uncomfortable. She was even thinking about moving. And they weren't the only ones who'd noticed something strange in the way John White behaved around her. Aaron felt it too. Rebecca's boyfriend described John as, borderline obsessed. After Rebecca got a permanent hairstyle, White started showing up every day just to compliment her. He'd appear at her house or at her job without warning, which felt really inappropriate. John didn't treat Rebecca like a daughter. He looked at her as a young, attractive woman. John's younger sister also told police that he'd call her sounding emotional, saying he finally had a real family, Sally, Rebecca, and little Connor. But when Rebecca started dating Aaron and spending less time with John and her mom, he began to complain. He said that after everything he'd done for her, she had abandoned him. He said it over and over, and his sister just laughed it off at the time. Why would a young woman spend all her time with older people? She thought back then. She never imagined it meant anything. But now, with Rebecca missing, she feared John had forgotten that his relationship was supposed to be with Sally, not with Rebecca. His attention started to look unhealthy, especially considering his past. Because of the conflicting stories about Pastor White, police asked him to take a polygraph. It was the fastest way to test whether he was being honest or hiding something. Knowing lie detectors aren't perfect and can be affected by stress, John hesitated. Should he even take it? Rebecca's mother, Sally, had to convince him, telling him the test would prove he had nothing to do with her daughter's disappearance. When John White finally agreed, a detective personally picked him up in a patrol car and had him sit in the front seat. The idea was simple: loosen him up on the drive to the testing center and, hopefully, get something useful out of him. They chatted about small things until the pastor relaxed. And the tactic worked perfectly. Before they even reached the polygraph examiner's office, John started opening up. He told the detective why he'd been so hesitant. He confessed to a criminal past no one knew about, not his fiancée, not the church. And these weren't minor mistakes. He had been involved in an attempted murder case. Back then, John was much younger and, according to him, a completely different person. He made mistakes, and some of those mistakes led to real prison time. He told the detective the charges had been unfair and had left a deep scar on his life. After his release, he claimed he turned himself around completely. When the church gave him a second chance, he took it. While police worked nonstop, the community stepped up too. In this small town where everyone knew each other, people were desperate to help. Volunteers formed search parties, combing the areas around Rebecca's home, hoping to find any clue that might point to where she'd gone. Social media filled with posts begging for information. Flyers with Rebecca's photo were everywhere, taped to poles, store windows, bulletin boards. Tension grew by the hour, but no real leads emerged. While John was taking the polygraph, detectives dug deeper into his past, and oh my God, what they found was horrifying. The new information stunned the entire department. The man who'd been welcomed as a reformed, God-fearing pastor, someone who used his past to guide others, suddenly didn't look like the man everyone thought he was. So who was Pastor John, really? John Douglas White was born on May 20th, 1957. He had two sisters, one older and one younger, and he had always been close to both of them. Their father had been the chief of police, the fire chief, and the mayor of Augusta, Michigan, the town where they grew up. Whenever John got into trouble, it always got back to his dad, so he tried to keep himself in line. He had a normal, healthy childhood and spent plenty of time with his family. After high school, White joined the Navy. Later, he was discharged, got married, and moved into a new home where he became friends with his 17-year-old neighbor, Teresa Etherington. One day, he invited Teresa into his basement, telling her he wanted to show her this cool racetrack he'd built for model cars. Teresa trusted him. He was the friendly neighbor, so she had no reason to say no. But as soon as she walked in, John suddenly stabbed her under the right shoulder blade. Stunned, Teresa turned around, trying to understand what was happening, and saw John White standing there with a knife in his hand, and this almost tortured expression on his face. Then the attack continued. Within seconds, he stabbed her 15 times, and then tried to strangle her. Miraculously, after getting medical help, she identified John as the attacker. She told police that White said this wasn't the first time he'd attacked a woman, oh my God, which made it clear he had some serious issues. John was arrested, charged, and convicted of attempted murder. He told his wife that he and Teresa were in the basement smoking weed when she supposedly attacked him with a knife, trying to steal his stash. His hands were covered in cuts. In court, White played the role of the remorseful man, calling himself a young fool who'd made a terrible mistake and promising he'd never do anything like that again. He was 22 at the time. White was sentenced to between 5 and 10 years in prison for the brutal attack and was ordered to attend psychological counseling. 2 years later, in 1983, he appealed, claiming his lawyer hadn't acted in his best interests. As a result, White received a reduced sentence. He was released after 2 years of incarceration and ordered to serve 2 more years on probation, along with mandatory mental health treatment. And just like that, John White walked away far too easily after a vicious assault on a defenseless teenage girl. Because of a lawyer's mistake and a lenient judge, John was back on the streets but not free of his urge to hurt women. 10 years later, he was the father of 2 children, with a third on the way. For years, John worked as a truck driver, but after his kids were born, he switched to a more stable job at an industrial laundry facility. He maintained the machinery there, and that's when his dark impulses resurfaced. In July of 1994, 26-year-old Vicky Sue Wall went missing. She worked at the same laundry facility and had been having an affair with John. They met secretly in the back parking lot of a store and had sex in White's pickup truck. That was the last place she was seen alive. Naturally, police went straight to John White. He admitted to the affair but claimed that shortly after surveillance cameras recorded them together, he dropped Vicky off alive and fine. He said he had no idea what happened to her afterward. Then he added that he'd been having memory lapses, so he couldn't be sure whether he might have done something to his lover. Right after that confession, he told his wife he couldn't live like this anymore and wanted to end his life. Instead, he just drove away and got drunk. Later, forensic experts found traces of blood in White's pickup, but not enough for DNA analysis. DNA testing existed at the time, but it required much larger samples. 6 weeks later, a passerby noticed a white tennis shoe lying in the grass roughly 3 kilometers from the store parking lot where Vicky had last been seen. When he walked closer, he saw drag marks and smelled the sharp, unmistakable odor of decomposition. It was the remains of Vicky Sue Wall. Because the body had undergone heavy decomposition from being exposed to the environment, the medical examiner couldn't determine the exact cause of death. The only clear detail was that she had been partially undressed. Her shirt and bra were wrapped around her neck. One thing was certain, Vicky had not died of natural causes. She had been murdered, and John White was the prime suspect. At the time, he was in a psychiatric hospital, likely preparing to claim insanity to avoid prison again. Since White refused to take a polygraph and wouldn't talk about his affair with Vicky, police didn't have enough evidence to charge him with murder. Prosecutors offered him a plea deal, which he accepted. He pled guilty to manslaughter. During sentencing, the judge considered his past violence against women and imposed the maximum penalty, 8 to 15 years in prison. But that wasn't everything police knew. John bragged to his friends and relatives that back when he worked as a trucker, he frequently picked up prostitutes, calling them lot lizards in this gross, dehumanizing way. After having sex, he would drop them off near dumpsters because he believed women like that had no value. None of these women ever filed reports, but the attacks on Teresa Etherington and Vicky Sue Wall showed that John's stories were horrifyingly believable. In prison, White told his psychologist that he wanted to kill the prosecutor, his own attorney, and the judge. He also admitted to having dark fantasies about their dead bodies. While he was incarcerated, his wife filed for divorce, and both of his parents passed away. White began studying the Bible, claimed he'd found remorse, and said he was dedicating his life to God. He attended group therapy and regularly met with mental health professionals. He earned a minister's license and, as a so-called model inmate, spent most of his time in the prison chapel. Despite countless red flags in his behavior and mindset, the authorities initially believed his transformation and released him in 2007, letting him rejoin society. He wasn't given probation, supervision, nothing. After prison, White moved north to start a new life. He met Sally, Rebecca Gay's mother, through online messages. He moved in with her at the trailer park and became a pastor in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. When applying for the church job, White explained his criminal record by saying he'd been with a woman who used drugs. She supposedly overdosed. He panicked, ran, and paid the price. The church believed him. John constantly thanked his little congregation for giving him a chance, but deep down, he hadn't changed at all. He simply started over somewhere far enough from his past that it cast a smaller shadow. His dark, twisted fantasies never went away. It was obvious. John had a serious problem, and now detectives suspected he might have acted out those fantasies on Rebecca. While Pastor John White was taking the polygraph, investigators dug deeper into his past, and oh my God, the sheer scale of his violence against women shocked them. He didn't hide the fact that he'd had legal trouble, but he massively downplayed what he had done. The church knew about something, but the elder believed he was a changed man of God who lived for today, not yesterday. White helped church families, watched their kids, and lived a quiet, respectable life. But could he really have been hiding something so dark the entire time? Once detectives realized how manipulative he truly was, they stopped believing his act. The polygraph showed that most of his answers were lies. With that, police secured a warrant to search his pickup truck and his trailer. In the truck, they found red stains and a broken necklace as if it had been ripped from someone's neck. In the cab, they found a bag filled with plastic zip ties, large contractor-grade trash bags, and women's underwear in a small size matching Rebecca's. Inside the trailer, they discovered a rubber mallet with traces of blood. When confronted with the evidence, White insisted Rebecca had been kidnapped, and he had no idea what happened to her. The interrogation lasted nearly 12 hours. It was early morning on November 1st, 2012. Realizing they could question him for hours without getting anywhere, detectives shifted their approach. They targeted his emotions. It was clear John loved Sally, Rebecca's mother, and didn't want to hurt her. Sally had improved his life, helped him become a pastor, welcomed him into her family. Detectives described what would happen to Rebecca's body over time, the decomposition, the sight her mother would have to face, the trauma little Connor would grow up with. They pushed him. Telling the truth would be the one way to show his love for Sally, his fiancée. At first, White asked for a lawyer, but after detectives left him alone for a long stretch of silence, he finally agreed to talk, but only after making one last phone call to his fiancée. When Sally picked up, John told her she was the love of his life, but after this, she wouldn't want to hear his voice ever again. He didn't explain anything, he just apologized over and over, saying nothing could be fixed now. Then he abruptly hung up. Pastor John White asked for a deal guaranteeing him life in prison, total isolation. After that, he confessed to murdering Rebecca Gay. This was his story. At some point, he said, he started feeling attracted to Rebecca. The night before Halloween, he'd watched a website featuring necrophilia content, which sparked his curiosity. After drinking several large cans of beer, he walked to Rebecca's home. It was around 2 in the morning, but the door was unlocked. John entered the house. Hearing the door, Rebecca ran out of her bedroom, and he struck her several times in the head with a rubber mallet. Before losing consciousness, she looked at him and said she recognized him. The last thing she ever saw was the face of a man she trusted completely. Realizing she was still alive, John tightened a plastic zip tie around her neck and pulled with all his strength. He dragged her body into the kitchen and undressed her. He claimed he couldn't remember whether he sexually assaulted her. Then he tried cleaning up the blood with household spray and towels. He turned off her phone, grabbed the keys to her Buick, parked the car near the bar, and tossed her keys and phone into a dumpster to confuse investigators. Walking back to the trailer, he placed the bloody clothing and towels into a large contractor bag along with Rebecca's body. When he loaded the bag into the truck, it tore open, her necklace fell out, and blood began leaking. That was the very thing that later led police to him. He dumped Rebecca's body in a ravine near the trailer park and disposed of the bloody towels. He scattered evidence within a 1-kilometer radius. After destroying every trace he could, he returned to Rebecca's trailer and slept on her couch for the rest of the night. The next morning, he changed Connor's clothes, drove him to his father, and acted like nothing had happened. Rebecca Gay's body was found in the ravine he pointed to, and her injuries matched his confession entirely. John White was sentenced to a minimum of 56 years and a maximum of 85 years in prison. That meant he could request parole only after 56 years. He was 55 at the time of sentencing, which effectively meant he would die behind bars. Some people have no place in society, and you are one of them, the judge said. But this pastor monster turned out to be too much of a coward to serve his sentence. 4 months later, on August 28, 2013, he took his own life in his cell. The case of John Douglas White exposed major failures in the justice system, its inability to recognize a predator and stop him before more women were hurt. If you watched all the way to the end, you are a true crime fan. Hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and drop a like. I'll see you in the next video.